4:33 a.m. South China Sea, Reed Bank, 250 kilometers west of Palawan Island, Philippines, 280 kilometers east of the Vietnamese coast. The water here is 600 meters deep, too deep for coral reefs, too remote for routine maritime patrol, and precisely within the overlapping claim zones of Vietnam, the Philippines, and the People's Republic of China. The Biển Đông-7 drilling platform rises 34 meters above the surface on 6 reinforced concrete legs that were sunk into the seabed in 2019 by Petro-Vietnam's Offshore Development Division. The platform produces 12,000 barrels per day from the Nam Con Sun Basin and carries a crew of 47 Vietnamese petroleum engineers, Filipino crane operators, and 2 Norwegian safety supervisors who rotate on 28-day offshore schedules. At 4:33 a.m., all 47 are asleep. The PLAN Coast Guard vessel, Haijing 5204, and its 3 accompanying fast response cutters have been running without navigation lights for 4 hours. Their approach from the northwest followed a routing that kept them below the horizon from the platform's radar until they were within 6 kilometers, inside the detection shadow created by the platform's own structural radar return. The Haijing 5204 is a 10,000-ton, Type 901 Coast Guard vessel, the largest class of Coast Guard ships in the world, longer than a U.S. destroyer and armed with a 76mm cannon and water cannon arrays. It is classified as a law enforcement vessel, not a warship, which means its activities fall under Coast Guard jurisdiction rather than naval jurisdiction in international law. The PLAN has studied this legal classification carefully. It is not an accident. At 4:33 a.m., armed PLAN Maritime Militia personnel, 34 in total, equipped with Type 95 assault rifles and non-lethal restraint equipment, wearing Coast Guard auxiliary uniforms rather than PLA military dress, board the Biển Đông-7 from 4 fast boats simultaneously. The boarding is executed with practiced precision. The platform's 2 Vietnamese security guards are subdued within 90 seconds using non-lethal contact. The 47 crew members are roused from their quarters and assembled in the main mess hall under armed supervision. No shots are fired. No one is physically harmed. At 4:41 a.m., the platform's radio operator, a Vietnamese national who managed to reach his station before the boarders reached his deck, transmits a distress signal on VHF channel 16 and via satellite EPIRB before his equipment is disconnected. The signal carries the platform's GPS coordinates. The words __, quote _0, __, and the operator's name. The signal transmits for 31 seconds before the antenna cable is cut. That 31-second transmission is received by 3 entities simultaneously: the Vietnamese Coast Guard Regional Command at Vung Tau, the 7th Fleet's Maritime Operations Center at Yokosuka, and the Combined Maritime Forces Watch Officer at Bahrain. At 4:42 a.m., all 3 are processing the same information. 47 civilian personnel aboard a Vietnamese-flagged petroleum installation in a disputed maritime zone have been taken under armed control by uniformed personnel who arrived on vessels bearing Chinese Coast Guard markings. The PLAN's legal architecture for the operation has been under construction for 8 months. The position Beijing will assert is that the Reed Bank falls within the 9-dash line, that Petro-Vietnam's drilling activities are therefore unlicensed resource extraction from Chinese sovereign waters, and that the Haijing 5204's action constitutes a lawful enforcement of Chinese maritime jurisdiction, not a seizure, but a cessation of illegal activity. The crew will be treated as detained personnel awaiting processing, not hostages. The platform will be placed under Chinese Coast Guard administration pending negotiation. The entire operation is designed to exist in the legal space between an act of war and a law enforcement action, too large to ignore, too ambiguous to respond to, with military force without appearing to be the aggressor. The architecture has one flaw. The 47 personnel on the platform include 2 Norwegian nationals. Norway is not a party to the South China Sea dispute. Norwegian nationals held under armed control on a seized installation by uniformed personnel of any nation constitute a hostage situation under International Maritime Organization protocols, regardless of the legal framing applied to the seizure. The Norwegian government's position will be unambiguous within hours. The international legal clarity it provides will be the thread that unravels Beijing's carefully constructed jurisdictional argument. But that legal process will take weeks. The 47 personnel on the Biển-7 will be there for weeks while it runs. The U.S. response is not designed to take weeks. USS America, a Wasp-class amphibious assault ship, has been operating in the South China Sea for 18 days as part of a scheduled freedom of navigation deployment. At 4:33 a.m., it is 310 kilometers southeast of Reed Bank, making 16 knots on a routine patrol track. The ship carries the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, approximately 2,200 Marines and sailors, along with an aviation combat element of 12 F-35Bs, 6 CH-53E Super Stallions, 9 MV-22 Osprey tiltrotors, and 4 AH-1Z Viper attack helicopters. The 31st MEU had been briefed on the Reed Bank situation 4 days earlier, when intelligence indicators showed the Haijing 5204 departing Hainan Island on a routing consistent with a Reed Bank approach. The briefing included a contingency planning annex that had been prepared 6 weeks prior, following a parallel intelligence assessment of PLAN Maritime Militia activation patterns near Vietnamese offshore installations. At 4:44 a.m., 3 minutes after the distress signal transmission, the USS America watch officer receives the Maritime Operations Center advisory and simultaneously receives a flash precedence message from 7th Fleet. Execute condition monitor, Reed Bank, platform seizure. Confirmed. Await further direction. Execute condition monitor means the ship goes to heightened readiness and the MEU commander is brought to the flag bridge. It does not mean launch. The launch authority for a marine boarding operation against a Chinese Coast Guard-controlled installation requires a specific diplomatic and legal threshold that has not yet been met. The U.S. government's position on the South China Sea dispute does not include unilateral recognition of Vietnamese sovereignty over Reed Bank. Before U.S. forces board a Chinese-controlled installation to free detained personnel, the legal basis for that action must be established. The legal basis arrives at 5:09 a.m. The Vietnamese government formally invokes Article 98 of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, the duty to render assistance to persons in distress at sea, and formally requests U.S. military assistance in securing the safety of the 47 personnel aboard the Biển-7. The request is transmitted through the U.S. Embassy in Hanoi and received at CENTCOM at 5:11 a.m. Simultaneously, the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs transmits a formal communication through diplomatic channels characterizing the situation as a hostage-taking under international maritime law and requesting consular access to its 2 nationals. The Norwegian communication specifically states that Norway does not recognize the legal basis for any detention of its nationals by Chinese authorities in international waters. The combined Vietnamese request and Norwegian characterization creates the legal architecture the U.S. needs. CENTCOM transmits execute authority to USS America at 5:14 a.m. The MEU commander issues the launch order at 5:17 a.m. Operation Deep Anchor activates. The 31st MEU's Deep Anchor plan had been drafted in 3 days following the contingency briefing. Refined overnight as the Haijing 5204's approach confirmed the intelligence assessment, and wargamed twice in tabletop format between the MEU commander and his staff before USS America received the execute authority. The plan accounts for 3 specific constraints that make this operation different from a standard opposed boarding. The presence of 47 civilian personnel whose safety cannot be compromised by the use of lethal force, except as an absolute last resort. the presence of 34 armed PLAN Maritime Militia personnel who are wearing Coast Guard uniforms and are therefore entitled to law enforcement rather than warfighter legal status, and the proximity of the Haijing 5204 and its 3 escort cutters, which carry crews totaling approximately 280 personnel, and which can reach the platform from their current positions in under 6 minutes. The Haijing 5204 is the operation's primary complication. Its 76mm cannon can engage helicopters at ranges up to 12 kilometers. Its water cannons, ostensibly non-lethal, can generate water pressure sufficient to knock a person from a helicopter or destabilize a fast boat approach. It has been positioned 1.4 kilometers northwest of the platform since 4:41 a.m., close enough to provide fire support to the militia personnel aboard the platform, and close enough to intercept any approaching helicopter that does not first neutralize its threat capacity. Deep anchor neutralizes the Haijing 5204 before the boarding element launches. At 5:31 a.m. 2AH-1Z, Viper attack helicopters launch from USS America and approach the reed bank position at wave height, below the Haijing 5204's radar horizon until they are within 8 kilometers. They carry AGM-114 Hellfire missiles in laser-guided mode and M197 20mm cannon. Their mission is not to engage the Haijing 5204, a Chinese Coast Guard vessel, with lethal weapons. Their mission is to conduct a show of force overflight at close range that establishes unambiguous U.S. military presence and transmits a specific message to the Haijing 5204's commanding officer via the International Maritime Emergency Frequency, that U.S. military assets are on station, that the detained personnel are U.S.-recognized protected civilians under active international maritime law, and that any interference with the approaching assistance operation will be treated as hostile action against U.S. forces. The Haijing 5204's commanding officer has been at sea for 11 hours and has been awake for 19. He receives the AH-1Z presence at 5:34 a.m. when the 2 helicopters break the horizon at 7 kilometers, running lights on, weapons clearly visible. He receives the VHF transmission simultaneously. He transmits to his headquarters at Sansha City for guidance. The transmission takes 4 minutes to reach the command and return with a response. The response, when it arrives at 5:38 a.m., instructs him to maintain position and not to impede the assistance operation. The response does not authorize him to engage U.S. military assets. His engagement authority is Coast Guard use of force doctrine. He can use force to protect his vessel from armed attack, but initiating fire against approaching U.S. military helicopters without being under attack would constitute an act of war for which he has no authorization. He maintains position. The AH-1Z Vipers take up station 2.1 kilometers off the Haijing 5204's port beam and hold. At 5:41 a.m., the boarding element launches from USS America. 2 MV-22 Ospreys carry the primary element, 24 Marines from the Force Reconnaissance Company, equipped with non-lethal and lethal capability, but with non-lethal as primary, and 4 CH-53 AS carry a blocking force of 60 additional Marines who will secure the platform's external deck positions and prevent any reinforcement from the escort cutters. 2 F-35Bs launch simultaneously and establish combat air patrol at 30,000 feet above the platform, their sensors tracking all surface contacts within 80 kilometers. The entire approach takes 23 minutes to cover the 310 kilometers from USS America to Reed Bank at Osprey cruise speed. At 6:04 a.m., the MV-22s reach the platform. The 4 CH-53Es arrive 90 seconds later. The platform's helideck, a 28-meter circular pad on the installation's northeastern corner, can accommodate 2 medium helicopters simultaneously. The MV-22s cannot both land at once. The lead Osprey lands first, its rotors tilted to helicopter mode, and the first 12 Force Reconnaissance Marines fast rope to the helideck in 11 seconds flat. The second Osprey holds at 30 meters altitude circling while the first clears the helideck. The 34 PLAN Maritime Militia personnel aboard the platform have had 23 minutes of warning. The AH-1Z overflights began at 5:34 a.m., and the departure of the boarding force from USS America was visually observable. They have used those 23 minutes to consolidate the 47 crew members in the main mess hall, position themselves at key access points on the platform, and establish radio communication with the Haijing 5204. They have not harmed any of the 47 personnel. They have positioned themselves in a defensive posture that is designed to maximize the risk of civilian harm if U.S. forces attempt a forcible extraction. The militia personnel near the mess hall are armed, the crew is in the same space, and any engagement in that space creates unacceptable risk to the people. Deep anchor is designed to protect. The Force Reconnaissance Marines do not attempt to breach the mess hall. The senior Marine on the helideck, a gunnery sergeant with 14 years of service and 3 previous maritime interdiction operations deployments, assesses the platform, layout from the helideck position, and makes a decision that will later be described in the post-operational review as __quote_1__. He does not move his element toward the mess hall. He moves them to the platform's external communication station on the northeast corner, a weatherproof equipment cabinet containing the platform's primary satellite communication system. The communications cable to the militia personnel's own radio equipment runs through this cabinet. He disconnects it. The 34 militia personnel inside the platform lose their communication with the Haijing 5204 at 6:09 a.m., 5 minutes after the boarding element lands. Cut off from external communication and outnumbered by a Marine element that has secured all external access points and holds the helideck, the mess hall door, and the communications infrastructure, the militia commander assesses his position at 6:11 a.m. He has 34 armed personnel inside a structure with no exit except through a Marine perimeter, no communication with his vessel, no reinforcement possible because the AH-1Z Vipers are still holding 2.1 kilometers off the Haijing 5204's beam, and a legal framework that his government's own instructions have constrained. He was told not to impede the assistance operation, which means he was implicitly told not to harm the civilians. His position has become untenable without harming the civilians, and his authorization does not extend to harming civilians. At 6:14 a.m., the mess hall door opens. The first militia personnel walk out with their weapons held at low ready, not raised, not holstered. The Force Reconnaissance Marines at the door direct them to the external deck where a CH-53E is waiting. The process of moving 34 militia personnel from the mess hall to the holding area on the platform's lower deck takes 19 minutes. No weapons are discharged. No one is physically harmed on either side. At 6:18 a.m., before all militia personnel have been moved, the mess hall door opens from the inside, and the first civilian crew member, the Vietnamese radio operator who transmitted the original distress signal, walks out. Behind him, in groups of 4 and 5, the remaining 46 crew members follow. The Norwegian safety supervisors are among the last to emerge. Both are assessed as uninjured. All 47 personnel are accounted for at 6:23 a.m. The senior Marine on the helideck transmits a single line to USS America at 6:23 a.m. All 47 personnel recovered, platform secure, 0 losses, deep anchor complete. The transmission is received aboard USS America at 6:23:41 a.m. The MEU commander notes the time. He does a calculation. 4:33 a.m. was when the PLAN Militia boarded the platform. 6:23 a.m. is when all personnel are recovered and the platform is secure. The elapsed time is 1 hour and 50 minutes. 110 minutes from the boarding to the recovery. From the U.S. Execute Authority at 5:14 a.m. to all personnel recovered, 69 minutes. The 34 militia personnel are held on the platform's lower deck under Marine supervision. The legal status of their detention will be resolved through a diplomatic process that begins within hours and will take weeks. They are not harmed. They are provided water and food. 2 require medical evaluation. 1 for a pre-existing cardiovascular condition that the stress of the situation has exacerbated. 1 for a minor laceration sustained during the original boarding of the platform before U.S. forces arrived. Both are evaluated by the MEU's corpsman and assessed as not requiring evacuation. At 6:31 a.m., the Haijing 5204's commanding officer receives communication from his headquarters, transmitted through a backup satellite channel that bypasses the communications infrastructure the Marines had disconnected. The communication instructs him to maintain position and await further diplomatic guidance. He has been watching the platform through his bridge binoculars since the MV-22s arrived. He has seen the Marine element land, seen the militia personnel emerge from the mess hall, seen the civilian crew members follow. He transmits an acknowledgement to his headquarters that contains a single additional observation. The U.S. force conducted the entire operation without firing a weapon. That observation will appear, in redacted form, in the Chinese Ministry of Defense's internal after-action assessment of the incident. The assessment will conclude that the operation's restraint was deliberate, that the United States had specifically designed the response to be operationally decisive without providing Beijing a legal or political pretext for escalation. The assessment will describe this as a form of precision that the PLAN Maritime Militia doctrine had not adequately prepared for. The document will be classified. Its conclusions will drive a comprehensive revision of PLAN Maritime Militia rules of engagement for offshore platform operations that will take 22 months to complete. The Biển-7's radio operator powers up the platform's backup satellite communication system at 6:47 a.m. A secondary unit the militia personnel had not located during their search of the communication spaces. He transmits a position report to Petro-Vietnam's offshore operations center in Vung Tau. The transmission is brief. It confirms the platform's GPS coordinates, the crew status, 47 personnel, all accounted for, no medical emergencies, and the platform's operational status, drilling operations suspended, structural integrity intact, resumption pending safety assessment. The Vung Tau Operations Center acknowledges at 6:49 a.m. At 7:07 a.m., drilling operations on the Biển-7 have not resumed. The platform's crew is being assessed by MEU medical personnel. 3 Marines remain on the helideck as a temporary security presence. The Haijing 5204 is still 1.4 kilometers northwest, its crew watching. The AH-1Z Vipers are still holding off its port beam. Everyone is waiting for the diplomatic process that will determine what happens next. What happens next will take weeks. The 47 personnel are safe. The platform is intact. The militia personnel are under supervised detention pending legal resolution. The operation that took the platform took 1 team of 34 armed personnel and 4 vessels and 8 months of preparation. The operation that recovered it took 69 minutes. Time from PLAN militia boarding to U.S. Execute Authority received 41 minutes. Time from Execute Authority to all 47 personnel recovered and platform secure, 69 minutes. Total elapsed time from boarding to recovery, 110 minutes. PLAN Maritime Militia personnel aboard platform at peak, 34. Personnel recovered without medical evacuation, 34. 2 requiring assessment, none requiring evacuation. U.S. civilian personnel recovered, 47 of 47. U.S. forces engaged in kinetic action, 0. Weapons discharged by any party during deep anchor, 0. Haijing 5204 and escort vessels maintained position throughout, no hostile action initiated. F-35B combat air patrol sorties, 2. No engagement authority required. AH-1Z Viper deterrent position maintained throughout, no weapons release. Marines deployed to platform, 84 total across boarding and blocking elements. U.S. personnel requiring medical attention, 0. Estimated diplomatic resolution timeline for militia detention, 3 to 6 weeks. Platform resumption of drilling operations, pending Vietnamese government and Petro-Vietnam safety assessment. Reed Bank legal status unchanged, disputed under competing claims. The operation changed the facts on the platform. It did not change the facts on the map. The two Norwegian safety supervisors were airlifted to USS America at 7:22 a.m. and departed for Manila aboard a C-2 Greyhound carrier onboard delivery aircraft at 9:14 a.m. They landed at Ninoy Aquino International Airport at 11:47 a.m. The Norwegian embassy duty officer met them at the terminal. Both declined medical examination. One of them, when asked by a journalist who had been tipped off about the flight whether he had been afraid on the platform, said that he had been more afraid during a North Sea storm in 2019 than during the 7 hours on the Beijing-7. The journalist wrote the quote down. It led the story in 3 Norwegian newspapers the following morning. The other Norwegian said nothing. He was thinking about the radio operator who had managed to get 31 seconds of transmission out before his cable was cut. He thought that 31 seconds was a remarkably short window to change the outcome of something. He would think about it for a long time.